So this is now June 15th, 2021, and Abhayagiri 25th anniversary retreat and day 7. So it's nice to have a big chunk of time, many days, to actually reminisce about things, and you can only really pack so much into 1, 2, or 3 days, so it's nice to have a period of time to reflect on these things and look at where we've been, where we're going. And this is kind of a transition period. Some people who have been coming during the last 7 days have expressed that it's nice to come out and reconnect, have an opportunity to come to the monastery and do a retreat type setting in the monastery. And we've been doing some online things due to the nature of the pandemic in the last year and a half or so, but then this is like a transition, so hybrid, half and half, having some people come to the monastery and then having some people online as well. So who knows what it'll continue to transition into, but it's a time of change, time of transition. So we've done a lot of work over the last 25 years. Everybody who's contributed to the monastery, and just the community, the work of building the community, and the people who come here to train, and then going through all the difficulties of being an anagarika, being a novice, being a young bhikkhu here in the monastery, and all the difficulties that entails, and it's difficult to train the mind and to practice and to call into question our desires and go against desire and try to transcend sensuality. So it's not easy. That's what the monastics are trying to do. That's what we're trying to do with the ordination. So it's a very ordinary and could even be seen as a boring lifestyle, but I'm almost never bored as a monk. So not because there's a lot to do, but just because there's always something to look at with the right attitude. There's always something to look at with the mind. There's always a practice. There's always something we can be practicing with. So if boredom comes up, then that's something we look at. How are we generating that? It's not coming from outside. We're starting to take responsibility for all these things that arise in the heart. We feel them and experience these things. And if we don't yet know how to practice, we might still think these things are being imposed on us from outside. But actually, it's our experience. This is our experience. So this is where we see dukkha. Dukkha's arising right there on the inside, and the ending of dukkha also. So that's what Ajahn Mun and the different forest ajahns teaching, and even great practitioners. We don't have to just talk about the forest ajahns. We have Aya Sobana and Samaneri Kachayana who are with us today. So I'm thinking about Mechi Gao and all the great female practitioners of the past as well. And they're saying the same thing. Some of my favorite teachings actually come from Mechi Gao, and one that stuck with me, and it's a very ordinary teaching, but she talks about we have to let go of our identifying with the past. So when we wake up in the morning, we say we've been sleeping, so when we sleep, we're in a different state than when we're awake. We're either dreaming, or we've at least temporarily let go of who we are. We've at least temporarily let go of the sense of self. Maybe it's coming up in various ways in our dreams, but we've temporarily let go of that, and different phenomena are perhaps arising while we're asleep, or even it might just be blank or empty, and then we wake up. And when we wake up, then we might be in a state, right when we wake up, we might be in a state where we're a little bit disoriented. We don't quite know where we are, who we are for a minute or so. And then we slowly reconstruct everything in our mind. And Meiji Gao is saying that we do this every day, like a ritual when we get up in the morning. It's like it's our own personal morning puja that we do every morning, is reconstructing who we are, the sense of self, and it's like, and all the past pains and things we have to remind ourselves to hold grudges about, and we have to remind ourselves who we like and we don't like, and we do that every day as a habit. And she said it's like fanning the smoldering embers of our life and keeping them hot and smoldering. And so what we want to do is to cool them down, and that's very much the training. We want to cool down the smoldering embers of our past. And I could see for myself that's really true. Waking up, okay, even if it's just ordinary, what am I supposed to be doing today? Okay, I have this or that project not done, or I have to do this and that on the calendar. And it's kind of having to get up in the morning and reconstruct it each day. So a lot of what gets built up over time is that sense of communal harmony. Ajahn Ñāṇiko brought up, I believe yesterday, the circle meetings, the heart meetings that we have every 2 weeks. And that gets built up over time. We check in with each other. The practice of nonviolent communication over the years, trying to find ways to not come to blows with each other in a big community. And so we haven't yet had something like a fist fight in the monastery, thankfully. It, could still happen at some point, but we want to avoid that if we can. In the Bhikkhu's Vinaya, it's only a pachitya to hit another person out of anger, but it's a very serious pachitya. Pachitya means just to be cleared through confession or just telling somebody else, talking to somebody else about it. So, but hitting is a very serious pachitya, so we don't want that to happen here. And that rule is interesting actually, because hitting, it doesn't have to be like hitting someone in the face as hard as you can. It can be hitting someone, the quote in the Vinaya is something like, even as lightly as hitting with a feather, but if it's out of anger, it's still a pachitya. So the intention, the motivation is very important. But if you hit someone, say as a joke, or they're your buddy and you kind of hit them or something playfully, that wouldn't be a pachitya, even if they were hurt and thought you were angry or something. So the anger, it's the Buddha's always pointing back to that anger intention is what that creates that offense. So building up the harmonious community over the years. And then the work and the camaraderie and the meditation, the morning and evening pujas, the meditation that we do all the time, and the staying up on the lunar observance days. So building up that sense of practice and camaraderie, and there's been very much been this ethos of, over the years, just if you want to practice, practice. If you don't want to practice, practice. So you just go to the morning and evening pujas, and this is just something we do. This is just something ordinary. So we do that throughout the year. And then sometimes we have forest practice, right now we're doing half on, half off. So like coming out of winter retreat, we had half the community coming to pujas, half the community doesn't have to come to pujas. They just come down for morning chores at 6:30 a.m. and then the 2.5 hour work period and the meal time, and then they can go back up. Don't have to be here for evening puja either. So that's forest practice, and we have a rotation. Half the community will do that for 2 weeks, then the other half for the next 2 weeks. Right now it's kind of everybody on forest practice, or everybody doing the schedule as they see fit based on this particular retreat right now. And then also things like respect. This is something built up over the years. And very much taking this is a very great quality that we try to transplant from Thailand, this sense of respect. And there's the phrase in Thai like, Pu noi khao rot pu yai khao rot pu noi. This means like the junior respects the elder respects the younger. So that's this mutual respect. So it's not that because, I'm an elder and you should hold your hand. One of the questions about holding your hands in Anjali. So I'm an elder, so therefore you should hold your hands in Anjali constantly while you're talking to me. And that's, why aren't you properly respecting me? So we don't want to get into that kind of mode of expecting some sort of respect. We don't demand or expect respect. This is not our way, not our style here. But respect is something that comes with time. It comes with trust, built up over time. And then the elders, they respect the youngers, that acknowledge the practice that the new bhikkhus, or even the anagarikas, the novices, that they're doing, respecting that intention, respecting that motivation to train and go through those difficulties and actually try to do this and put forth the effort, put forth the work. So there's that. It's kind of like taking dependence. It's where the Ajahn Ñāṇiko Taro chant, where the younger aspirant taking dependence and says, well, now I am a burden of the Tara, and the Tara is a burden of mine. So there's this mutual exchange there. And there can even be mutual learning. So like for somebody who's been in this for a long time, then there may be younger people who come in who have a fresh perspective, and then we, as those who have been here for a while, then we might lose that freshness sometimes, so that fresh perspective can be helpful. And the junior people might actually have good suggestions, good ways of doing things. So to be open to that, we still have to train ourselves as well as elders. So we're also open to that way of being, or that way of training ourselves. So that's also very important in terms of building up a sense of communal harmony, because it would be easy to kind of slip into, well, do it just because I told you to. Your duty is to obey and not ask questions. So we don't want to be like that, like the kind of tyrannical parent. But actually, it's good to ask questions. That was one of the amazing qualities of the Buddha, is that he had a reason for everything. He actually had a practical or a practice reason for everything. Do this because ... It's gonna. If you do this, it's going to increase your level of well-being and happiness. If you do this, it's going to increase your suffering. And he's laying it out there. Yes, you can choose, but if you do that, dukkha increases. If you do this, dukkha decreases. So he's not just saying, do that because I said so. So everything the Buddha teaches, the Buddha says, is for to increase well-being and happiness and decrease suffering. The whole teaching is about that, about letting go and developing that sense of freedom. And the Buddha, he's accomplished his aim when when people follow the teaching. When people follow the teaching to the T, then the well-being and the sense of ease and happiness increases, and the suffering and dissatisfaction and dukkha decreases. So that's ending of suffering. That's the third noble truth. So that's what we're looking for, and that's what the Buddha is really intending for us. The Buddha is very, very compassionate, so he's not just being punitive with us. So there may be some Ajahns in Thailand who had the particular style of being very strong with their students, but it's always, if you look at it closely, you look at each situation, when that particular Ajahn was being strong, it was because the student was going to do something that was going to increase their own suffering. And they may not have known it or realized it, but say a breach of the precepts or some sort of inappropriate relationship with somebody else or anything. And then you might think, well, why is the Ajahn being so hard on me? Why are they so fierce? But then it's actually because they're doing something which is going to actually increase their own dukkha. So there's the very brief-lived dukkha of the Ajahn being strong with them, but then that can help to undo the long-term dukkha they're getting themselves into. So it tends to be with that intention, and if they're coming from a place of purity, or pure-heartedness. So we train and we cultivate all these qualities of patient endurance and generosity, because that leads to an increase in our well-being and happiness. So all these things, these commitment to wakefulness, the gradual training, the being very good with the precepts, being pure with the precepts, this is all leading to a sense of well-being and happiness. This is the result. Even sense restraint. So we hear the word restraint, and we might get an image of like somebody's getting a restraining order against us, or like we need to be restrained. We need to be tied up, like with some sort of restraining vest or apparatus. But the restraint isn't the best translation for sangwara. Sangwara, the sense restraint, sangwara sila, the composure. So composure is probably a better translation for that particular word. And composure has a much different feeling to it, a much different feeling tone. You get like a sense of uprightness, and so sense composure, composing the eye, composing the ear, composing the nose, composing the tongue, composing the body, composing the mind. So sense composure as leading to more well-being and happiness, and then the relinquishment of the hindrances, which Luang has been talking about as well, so which comes in the gradual training after the sense composure. There's the relinquishing of the 5 hindrances, and then he goes into the Samma Samadhi. It's a very natural progression. So that's something we learn here as well, is that gradual training, so committing to living or at least being connected with the monastery over a long period of time, and you have that sense of gradual training. And if we do train, then things do get better. But we have to have patient endurance, and we have to have perseverance as well. So as our perseverance grows over a long period of time, and we have these facilities, we have this space in order to come and nurture that perseverance and that patient endurance, that kanti barami. So the perseverance, that's like aditana. That's the way I tend to try to think of aditana, is perseverance. So we might think of aditana as like, well, I made an aditana to, not drink, not eat sugar for a month or something like that. So that's one type of adhitthana. But another way of thinking of adhitthana is following through. So to follow through with things. And the bigger, more broad brush adhitthanas, such as following through with the patimokkha, keeping the patimokkha sila purely, following through with the monastic life, meaning following through with it, meaning practicing, meaning seeing it through to the end. So that's also one way of thinking of adhitthana in a more broad brush sense. And we don't need to add too much on. So we already make that adhitthana to keep the precepts. Any other special practice we do is added on to that, but just making the adhitthana to keep the precepts is already really, really, really good. And then the important thing is just to keep going. One of the very common advices you'll hear, and if you go to pay respects to like an Ajahn in Thailand, is just bai loi loi, just keep going. That's one of the most common pieces of advice. Patibat bai loi loi. It's like just keep practicing, just keep going. And that is really what it is. It's just, we might feel sometimes that it's not working, I'm not doing it right, my meditation isn't going well, my practice isn't going well, my mind is a mess, defilements, greed, hatred, and delusion. We can be like one of those woodpeckers, just like bashing our head against the metal gutter, and just, it's really, we can kind of harm ourselves by thinking like that. But if we just think, keep going, keep going, keep going, it's like being on a long hike, just one step at a time. And we're on a long hike. We're on a hike of, we're on a 100-mile hike, and we're just, why am I? It's not working. I'm not there yet. It's not working, but it is working. So it's only not working if we stop walking. So if we stop walking, yes, we're not going to get there. So we just keep going, keep going, keep going, keep walking, and we forget about it. And we say, okay, no matter how long it takes, I'm just going to keep walking. The analogy Ajahn Mahabua makes is it's not just like you're walking, but it's like you're really inspired at first. So you're running on the path, you're running as fast as you can to get to the goal. And then you get tired, you wear yourself out, and then you're walking for a while, and then the going gets more difficult, and you're slogging through the mud, and you're falling over, and you're falling over, you're on your stomach for a little while, you're being dragged through the gravel, and then you get up and you're crawling, and then you get up and you're walking. So it's really like that. But as long as we keep walking, keep moving forward, that also doesn't mean we're really frantic about the practice, or we might get really inspired by teaching and practice really hard for 3 days and then burn ourselves out. But we're looking for some sort of consistency. So this is we've probably heard it many times before, this is a marathon, not a sprint. It's not just a marathon, it's a ultra marathon. So just what's sustainable? What can I sustain? And what can I do that I can just keep going each day in and day out. Once we start to get the results from that, then there won't be something like boredom. It just won't arise. Luangpo Cha, in one of his teachings, he said usually you've been a monk for about 5 years, and you reach the state we call bua, which is bored, fed up. It's not working. This is just pointless, hopeless. Senior monks aren't inspiring enough. So I used to think like that too. I remember getting to 10 vasas, and thinking, wow, I would be really uninspired by myself when I when I first came here, because I had such hopelessly high ideals. And I remember journaling. I would journal a lot when I was first here as an Anagarika, and I remember looking back at the journal, like after being an Anagarika for 6 or 7 months, and I was just so critical and so kind of hopelessly idealistic. And then I just remember it was kind of like seeing that and realizing, yeah, I don't think that's going to work to be like that. And threw it in the fire, in the sauna, when it's just, this is way too critical, way too judgmental, idealistic. So then learning over time to come to a more sense of, like Ajahn Ñāṇiko translates metta as non-judgmental awareness. So that sense of learning how to see the qualities on a deeper level of Dhamma, like going to Thailand and seeing Lumpur Liam and a lot of different ajahns, meeting a lot of different ajahns, and learning how to see beyond the personality and learning what are these Dhamma qualities. And sometimes they're very hard to see. So in the West, you get asked the question a lot, how do you know if someone's an arhat? I want to follow an arhat. I want to be sure that, and I like to repeat something. If somebody asks that question, I like to repeat what Master Hua would say about that. Master Xuan Hua would say, if somebody's an arhat, you're probably not going to know. It's going to be very hard for people to see, because they're not going to be advertising themselves. So usually, and then also a wise Western monk at Wat Pah Nanachat once said that in the West, if you act the part, you'll be seen as that. So like if you go around saying you're an arhat, people will probably start to think you're an arhat. But then the real one who's settled and let go, people won't know because they're not advertising themselves. So trying to look at how can we be more like that? How can we be more like that have that sense of being humble and not advertising ourselves? This is like the story of Devadatta also. So like Abhayagiri, we're online right now, we're on YouTube, and hopefully we're not looking to become YouTube sensations or famous on Facebook or whatever, because this is like the story of Devadatta, which we read during the winter retreat, which is there's so much good Dhamma in that story. And Devadatta, he was actually a very good monk, but the beginning of his downfall was the Venerable Devadatta was alone in seclusion, and the following thought occurred to him: how can I increase my fame, honor, and gain? And then that was the beginning of the whole disaster that happened. And he was already older too. It was nearing the end of the Buddha's dispensation, actually. So just to be careful of thoughts like that, if any of us have thoughts like that, just to be very, very careful of that, and then to not actually act on those thoughts, but to see them and recognize them for what they are, as a danger, as an arrow, as a dart, as a tumor, as something to be removed. This is very important. So there's that idea of not wanting to be too public, wanting to hunker down, get down to the practice, and that idea of what can we do to sustain these things in the long term. One of the interesting things about Theravada, one of the things that drew me and which still draws me, which I still like, is that idea that the style never really changes. So we have shaved heads, we have brown robes, sometimes naturally dyed robes. We live simply, we live according to the Vinaya, and so it's not a passing trend, it's just it's something timeless. It's something that, it's like a thread, like a sutta, through time, through history. So within that, and that's also the Dhamma is akaliko, the Dhamma is timeless. So through history you have different trends and different empires rising and falling. So the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, you have the Buddha, but then you have Theravada monasticism, and within that thread, all the way till the present, you have the rise and fall of empires, the rise and fall of different trends, and we can apply that to the present time as well. So things that rise and fall in the world, rise and fall, rise and fall. The rise and fall of countries, the rise and fall of boundaries, the rise and fall of anything. Rising and falling is the world. The world arises, the world falls away. That is the world. The world is that which arises and falls away. Yeah. So we think of the world in that sense, that's more bound by time. Each aspect of the world is bound by time, but the Dhamma is timeless, so the Dhamma is a thread that goes through all of that and sees through all of that. So Abhayagiri, in terms of the facilities, that's really all it is a place to come and start to see that, start to gain a bit of a new perspective or a different perspective. Training the mind also, so facilities to train the mind. Training the mind is very difficult. We have our way of seeing the world and what we call our ditthi mana. Luang Por Ban said ditthi mana is like an iron curtain that's in front of us that's very difficult to get through. So our ditthi mana is the way we see ourselves in the world, however that may be, however correct or skewed it may be. That's the ditthi mana, and there's also the ditthupadana, the clinging to views, and we tend to be more stuck to these things than we like to admit. It's very, very difficult to get through that, to let go of the clinging to views, clinging to viewpoints. Just as a thought exercise, if we have an opinion about something, it could be anything, are we able to actually, bring to mind somebody who disagrees with us about something and actually say, what if I said that? What if I did that? What if I thought that way? Oh no, I would never do that. I would never think like that. I'm not one of them. So really just doing that thought experiment can be a very healthy, very good Dhamma practice to remain very open and non-judgmental awareness, to have that non-judgmental awareness for. So, well, I can have metta, but not for them, or not for this particular person, or not for this particular group. But then what is that? I mean, that's not boundless. That's not what we're looking for. So that's judgmental awareness. So what we want is non-judgmental awareness. And why do we want that? We want that because it leads to peace and happiness for ourselves and others. It's not that we want it just because the Buddha said we should do that, or a monk said we should do that. But the reason hopefully that we're saying you should do things is because it's going to lead to a sense of ease and well-being and a greater level of happiness, letting go. Also, ditthi mana, it binds us. So when the Buddha says there's one taste to the Dhamma, the taste of freedom, that's being unbound from things like clinging to views, clinging to sensuality, and so on. Any type of clinging. clinging to the world in general. So this is, we're enslaved. We're like slaves to this. We're slaves to our own way of seeing things in terms of the world. So trying to extract ourselves or break free of that is quite difficult, and the main reason it's difficult is that sense of identification. So we are identified with these things, with the way we see things. And this also creates the world. So the world we notice, the way vijnana is directed. Vijnana is like directed consciousness, so divided knowing. Vijnana, the way vijnana is directed is based on our ditthimana. And we actually create the world outside of us based on directing our awareness to where we know it's going to get the validation, where we know it's going to get strengthened, where we know it's going to strengthen the ditthimana more, and that's when the ditthimana is actually doing the directing. So let's try to back up the Dhamma, have the Dhamma do the directing. So like, well, rather than focus on this aspect, maybe focus on not sure, or impermanence, or the nature of change, or we don't. It may change. It may become different. It's ever other than that, than what we're assuming it to be. So when we see things according to, say, our built-up sense of self, or our edifice of perception, which is ditthimana, and we're actually going out, the vijnana is actually noticing different things, but the vijnana is being directed by that, so that it's then bolstering up. It's a cycle. It's a vicious cycle, and then that strengthens the sense of identification and looking for a validation of how we already identify, and so on. So this is we have to be careful of this. It's very insidious and but also very normal, and it's dukkha. It causes us to keep being trapped in dukkha. So just to have these facilities when we build a monastery over 25 years, and just have the facilities to be able to come and even think about something like that. How often do we even think about things like this? And just to have a place to come where people are trying to unravel these things in the mind and the heart, and that's it's very, very worthy of supporting, very worthy of helping to build up. It can be, or not just speaking about Abhayagiri, but any branch monastery that allows people to try to undo that process of being entangled by the world. It's a worthy investment. Abhayagiri, that's Longpa was talking about that word earlier as well, so fearless mountain, but Abhaya meaning being translated as fearless, Giri meaning mountain, but Abhaya also having connotations of a place of safety, a place of security. And that's also what we try to create over the years, is that place where anybody can come to the monastery and learn about that Dhamma perspective and see themselves according to Dhamma, learn how to see themselves and the world according to Dhamma. So that's a gift that's abhayadana, a gift of safety, a gift of fearlessness, a gift of security. And being on retreat for a period of time, even if it's just for one meditation session, it's also a good time to be asking ourselves, can we drop our past and our future, at least temporarily? Can we drop our projects and our plans and our agendas, at least temporarily, and not to permanently let go of them, but we can at least set them aside for the time being. We can at least set them aside for one retreat, or for, if not for one retreat, then for one meditation session. We can at least set aside all of the things that are normally driving us in the world and just feel that and see, what is that like? That sense of emptiness, but the emptiness actually is a sense of freedom as well. So it's not a vacant or bland emptiness. It's not a state of blankness that we're shooting for, but it's very full, it's very fulfilling, and it's very full, and will feel very good to not be bound by the things that we're normally bound by. It'll be very cool and clear, fresh, bright, stable. Pure. If we're able to do that, if we're able to drop things at least temporarily, and we might even start to think, well, why didn't I do that before? Why didn't I think of doing that before? How could I have not seen that? It was so obvious. Letting go of anger leads to such well-being that how could I have not seen that before? How could anybody give rise to that if they knew that letting go of anger, letting go of ditthimana would lead to such freedom and well-being and ease and happiness? If people knew that, then well, of course, everybody would drop it right away. But that's what makes the practice difficult. The mind is very habituated in certain ways. So the way we pick things up is very habitual. And we just keep going, keep going, keep going. It just takes time. There's that time lag between starting practicing and actually getting at least little drops of the fruits of the practice. And when I say fruits of the practice, I'm not talking about like Maggapala necessarily, not talking about like these super mundane achievements necessarily, but even just ease and happiness that we didn't have before, that just come from just the mind starting to get trained to be able to let go of things. That's like provisions for the journey, that ease and happiness that we get when we start to receive just a little bit of the fruits of the practice, but then it takes time. We actually have to keep walking, keep going to get to these places. It takes time, it takes years. And then also, we're getting older, so then there's the different stages of life that occur. So there might be insights, or there might be different things that happen at the different stages of life as well. If we roll that all together in the practice, we live a life of practice. And as we age and get older, living a life of practice, then we start to see our lives according to Dhamma, according to the practice. So we have this opportunity to be, say, in a place like this. It's still here, and we'll continue to maintain it and develop it, and continue with the morning and evening pujas, and just keep going, keep going, keep going, until, who knows? We don't know what's going to happen in the future. So we might be able to see a little bit of causality, see things a little bit, but it's really difficult to know how is it going to be in the future. So we just take it one day at a time. We just keep going. So Those are just a few somewhat connected, somewhat disconnected thoughts bopping around in the mind for today. I'll leave it there for talk for today.